Hey everyone, Nathan here, Absurd Being. Alright, let's just get into it, Chapter 5, Asymmetrical Synthesis of the Sensible. Kind of an opaque chapter heading, but let's see where this chapter is going to take us. First section of the video today is diversity and difference. So Deleuze distinguishes here between these two terms, diversity and difference. Diversity is given, he says. So this is difference at the level of the empirical or the sensible. It's that just the normal, everyday way we understand the word difference. Difference itself, as the philosophical term for Deleuze, is, on the other hand, that by which the given is given as diverse. So it's like the difference that underpins or grounds the everyday form of difference. And it's nothing more than what we've been talking about throughout this whole book, difference in itself. He calls this difference, this fundamental difference, he calls it a fundamental inequality, which is the condition for every phenomenon. Again, just kind of, we've talked about this before, there's nothing special here. All diversity and change, therefore, refers to this more originary difference, which is its sufficient reason. And this is correlated with orders of difference. So different orders, again, we've talked about this as well. Some of the examples that Deleuze gives here: level, temperature, pressure, tension, and intensity. Now, what's of particular importance for us here is this difference of intensity. So we'll spend a little bit of time talking about this. Difference of intensity, Deleuze says, is actually a tautology, because every intensity is fundamentally differential in that each term refers back to a prior difference. So there's a quote for this. Every intensity is capital E minus capital E prime, where capital E itself refers to an E minus E prime, and E to a stylized E minus stylized E prime, etc. Each intensity is already a coupling, in which each element of the couple refers in turn to couples of elements of another order. So it's just like this intensity, every term in the intensity which makes the intensity what it is, there's a difference in itself. So an intensity is fundamentally a difference already between two terms. That's what it is. It already embodies this idea of difference. But each of those terms that make up the difference of intensity is itself another, is made up of another group of terms, another pairing of terms which are intensive as well. So this, Deleuze calls the state of infinitely doubled difference disparity. And disparity is thus the sufficient reason of all phenomena. The reason of the sensible, the condition of that which appears, is not space and time, but the unequal in itself. Disparateness as it is determined and comprised in difference of intensity, in intensity as difference. So the unequal in itself, that capital U unequal in itself, that's difference in itself. That's this difference as opposed to the diversity that we talked about at the beginning of the video. And basically what Deleuze has done here, I think, is just express difference in terms of intensity. And that's kind of important for us, for where Deleuze wants to go with this. And that leads us into the second part of the video today, intensity and extensity. So we start here with a couple of principles. Carnot's principle, which is a thermodynamic principle, and it just says that the efficiency of a thermodynamic cycle depends solely on the difference between the hot and the cold temperature reservoirs. and Curie's principle, which is a principle of symmetry, and this says that the symmetries of the causes are to be found in the effects. So both of these principles are important for Deleuze because they express what we've just concluded, that all phenomena are correlated with orders of difference. Difference is the reason of change. It's what drives, it's the what can I say, generative force behind all phenomena. It's what makes things the things that they are. However, Deleuze says that it's difficult to understand how these principles can be connected within a greater whole. The way he describes it, he says, it's difficult to see how these principles are local manifestations of a transcendental principle, i.e. difference. It's difficult to place these principles within this broader transcendental principle. Why? So I get two reasons from my reading of this. The first is that we know only forms of energy which are already localized and distributed in extensity, or extensities already qualified by forms of energy. So we know only forms of energy already localized and distributed in extensity, or we know extensities already qualified by forms of energy. In other words, we arrive at the party too late. By the time our experience of reality takes place, we've already missed what's happening, what's happened here, why it is that the phenomenon appears as it does. So we've missed the deeper underlying principle, which is difference in itself, that Deleuze wants to point out for us. Because by the time we experience the thing, by the time we experience energy, for instance, it's already localized within extensity. And by the time we experience extensity, it's already been infused with energy, qualified by energy. So if we dig down a little bit deeper into this, we can see that energy, what Deleuze says, we can see that energy is always a combination of two factors, one intensive and one extensive. He gives a few examples. I'll give you a couple here. For example, force and distance, which makes up linear energy, and surface tension and surface area, which makes up surface energy. So by the time we understand linear energy, motion, it's already combined with an intensive force and an extensive sense of distance. So that they're already coupled together. And the problem with this is that in this pairing, the intensity is always subordinated to the extensive qualities, i.e. the primary physical qualities, which Deleuze calls qualitas, for example, motion, size, those kinds of things, and secondary perceptible qualities, or what he calls quale, which are things like touch. So that's a problem because, like I said, it covers over the intensive half of the equation. So we miss one important facet of what it is that grounds or causes phenomena to be the phenomena that they are. And the second reason why it's difficult to connect these two principles, Carnot's principle and Curie's principle, to map them into this or place them within this greater transcendental principle, is that difference as the sufficient reason of change is only so to the extent that the change negates that difference. So once the change happens, whatever it is, once the change from state A to state B takes place, the difference that drove that change is negated by the change itself. So it's always covered over. We never see difference as any kind of driving force here, as having any kind of role in this process. So again, as we saw with the first reason, intensity is covered over by extensity. And the consequence of both of these is that intensity always appears as quality, never quantity. So intensity always appears as extensive qualities. So it always appears as those primary physical qualities or secondary perceptible qualities. And then that means that, and this is where Deleuze differs from Bergson, unlike Bergson, Deleuze wants to say that intensive quantity is an actual thing. And that's what we need to understand in order to grasp this deeper insight that he's offering regarding difference. Now, how change negates difference, how intensity is always subordinated to extensity, is explained by Deleuze with reference to good sense and common sense. And that's where we're going in the third part of the video, which I've called Good Sense and Common Sense Revisited. So you remember good sense from a few videos back where we were talking about the image of thought, the dogmatic image. Good sense is, Deleuze redefines it in this chapter as the norm of distribution from the point of view of the empirical selves and the objects qualified as this or that kind of thing. So going back to what we said in the chapter, the image of thought, it's what each faculty contributes in order to determine the thing as this or that kind of thing. So it's a harmonizing kind of sense which lets objects appear as particular things, grasped from different angles, different perspectives, through different modalities, if you like. But it's the way that those different modalities organize and cohere amongst themselves to converge upon the object qualified in a particular way. So in other words, in a more general sense, good sense distributes or repartitions. And it does so according to a well-ordered, organized harmony. But in order for it to do this, to distribute, to repartition those different perspectives, those different faculties, those different modalities, in order to repartition them so that they converge in this harmonious way, we have to presuppose a prior mad distribution, Deleuze calls it, the crowned anarchy or difference. So we have to presuppose that there was something that wasn't ordered, that wasn't harmonious, a prior mad distribution of things. And keeping this prior mad distribution in mind, Deleuze says this: good sense does not negate difference. On the contrary, it recognizes difference just enough to affirm that it negates itself, given sufficient extensity and time. Between mad difference and difference cancelled, good sense necessarily lives itself as a universal rule of distribution, and therefore as universally distributed. So this is kind of interesting, I think. Good sense doesn't negate difference. Rather, it admits just enough difference, basically so that difference hangs itself by its own rope. It negates itself, given enough extensity and time. Eventually, difference will cancel itself out. And that's why we don't see it. That's why it's so difficult to recognize as this driving force that Deleuze is pointing out here. So in this picture, there are basically two extreme poles. There's complete or mad difference, and then there's cancelled difference. And in between, good sense brings about what Deleuze calls a reduced difference. And basically, this is exactly what thermodynamics describes, right? Thermodynamics is a movement towards homogeneity, towards uniformity. That's one way of understanding this principle. And it does this, it enacts or it effects this movement as a force which distributes according to a well-ordered, harmonious organizing principle, right? Which is exactly what we're talking about with good sense. And finally, in that quote, Deleuze talks about good sense as a universal rule of distribution and as universally distributed. And this is actually, I think, a reference to common sense, which we're going to talk about in just a moment. He also calls this good sense a milieu which leads to the cancellation of difference. And that's a good way of putting it, because it lets us kind of see the connection, I think, to thermodynamics. Another metaphor, I think, maybe even a better one, is to think of a field or a pocket of order amongst an overall increasing disorder. And that's what good sense is. Good sense is that pocket of order, even though as a whole, taken as a whole, the universe itself, if you like, is actually increasing in disorder. Disorder is actually increasing, but there's this small pocket where which is ordered, which is well ordered, which is harmonious, and that's exactly this good sense that Deleuze is talking about. Another thing that's important here is that we said given sufficient extensity and time, good sense difference negates itself. So what's important, one of the important features there is time. And good sense, Deleuze says, is based on the first synthesis of time that we talked about way back at the beginning of this series. The first synthesis of time was habit, right? The living present. That was this originary synthesis. And habit, if you remember, sees the movement from the past to the future as a movement from the particular to the general. That's the way we described it. Good sense understands this as a movement from the improbable to the probable, in the sense that the past is less probable because it's less probable to occur for an observer situated within the system because it's already happened. The future then, for such an observer, for someone in the system, is therefore more probable. And since the past is maximal difference and the future, that mad difference, crowned anarchy of Deleuze's, and the future is the cancellation of difference, then the movement from the past to the future is therefore a reduction of difference. And when we combine these two ideas, we see that the reduction of difference is therefore more probable. And this, I think, is getting us towards a deeper metaphysical explanation of thermodynamics, which is something that is interesting, I think. Bergson has also said something very similar. It's no surprise that the first synthesis of time, Deleuze connects that quite closely with Bergson, and Bergson also worked out this a way of understanding thermodynamics which went beyond kind of the level of science, which within Bergson's philosophy was kind of stranded at space. And within Deleuze, we're talking about extensity, stuck on extensity. the intensity has been lost or been covered over. The intensity is difference. And so those two, the two kind of dovetail here in this deeper approach or attempt to work out, understand, or explain thermodynamics. Okay, so we also have to talk about common sense here. Anytime good sense and common sense are closely related. So common sense in the chapter, The Image of Thought, was defined as unity or identity. There are two aspects of this: the subjective and the objective. Subjectively, common sense is the supposed identity of a self, which provides the unity and ground for all the faculties, and objectively by the identity of whatever object served as a focus for those faculties. So that's common sense. Because this unity, this identity, is static, it therefore presupposes a dynamic instance capable of determining the indeterminate object as this or that thing, and of individualizing the self situated in this ensemble of objects. So that was a semi-quote. But the idea, I think, is that this refers us back to good sense. So we talked about, in good sense, we talked about that universal rule of distribution, which is universally distributed, and that was a reference to common sense. And now we've got in common sense, which is this idea of unity or identity. It refers, as static, it refers back to the dynamic aspect of good sense, which is kind of how that unity is brought about. And this is the relation between good sense and common sense, which I want to just explain in a little bit more depth. So the cancellation of difference is brought about by a distribution which distributes according to a rule of identity or unity. Okay, so that distribution is good sense in that little sentence, and the rule of identity or unity is common sense. So good sense is, well, I'm going to explain it now. Good sense is the distribution that cancels difference. Common sense is the unity or identity. And I kind of think of this as the form. If you can think of that, I think it makes it a bit easier to grasp. Always want to be careful with the word form because it's so heavily associated with Aristotle. But if you can avoid that connection, I think it helps to understand this. Common sense is that form of identity or unity which is applied to the subject or object, which allows it to be that thing that it is, which allows it to which allows the difference to be cancelled and for the thing to stand out as the particular thing determined by these particular qualities. In essence, then, good sense reduces difference according to common sense, i.e. a rule of universal distribution, which would apply to the object, and a rule universally distributed, which would apply to the subject. So that's how I connect those two ideas. And there is a quote which I want to go through to just kind of close off this section. We can define common sense by the process of recognition and good sense by the process of prediction. The one involves the qualitative synthesis of diversity, the static synthesis of qualitative diversity related to an object supposed the same for all the faculties of a single subject. The other involves the quantitative synthesis of difference, the dynamic synthesis of difference in quantity related to a system in which it is objectively and subjectively cancelled. So this is a somewhat maybe obscure quote, but I think it will allow us to kind of tie up this section quite nicely. So common sense he calls recognition. He associates this with recognition because it statically recognizes, in a sense, the subject and the object as what they are. That is according to identity, unity. And good sense is prediction because it dynamically applies what I called the form of identity. And this is dynamic because it's based on the first synthesis of time. So we can kind of think of good sense and common sense in those ways. Common sense as recognizing the subject and the object, and good sense as predicting because it's applying those forms. It's applying what I've called the forms of common sense. And it's really just a form. It's applying that rule which brings the thing together under the form of unity or identity. I keep using that word. Deleuze doesn't use it, I don't think. And I do want to stress that it's not. We shouldn't start thinking in terms of Aristotle here, but I think it's such a nice. I think it's such an appropriate word here if you can avoid those connotations. Dynamic because based on the first synthesis of time. So that's good sense and common sense. And the other thing that he says here, which really I think connects us nicely back to the very beginning of this chapter, is common sense synthesizes diversity into unities. Diversity, remember, was that empirical or sensible difference. Diversity, as sensible then, is qualitative. And good sense synthesizes difference by reducing it. And since difference is not sensible, it is therefore quantitative. And those last two notions connect us right back to where we started with diversity and difference, and the way we talked about qualitative and quantitative and intensive and extensive, all of that kind of, I think that kind of circles back nicely and just wraps that up fairly tidily. As we go into the last section today, which is paradox. So the paradox that Deleuze is talking about is how we can think difference. Difference is not the given. We said this before, but it's that by which the given is given. It's that which underlies the given. It's that which makes that diversity diverse in the first place. It must first be sensed as that which gives diversity to be sensed. It must be thought as that which creates the diversity to be thought. So it's always that which is beneath what we are familiar with, beneath what we experience. So there are two aspects to this paradox, both of which I think reflect the way that difference is, in a way, prior to our capacity to grasp it, although not prior to in a temporal sense, but in a deeper, I guess, transcendental sense, maybe Deleuze would say. So first is the subjective, and the paradox here breaks up the common exercise of the faculties and places each before its own limit, before what Deleuze calls its incomparable. So it places before thought the unthinkable. It places before memory the forgotten, and before sensibility the imperceptible. So this is just that idea that it's already in our thinking, if you like. Difference is already a part of our thinking before we start thinking, or as soon as we start thinking, it's already there. Hence, it's this unthought. By the time we remember, it's already there. Difference is already buried in that. Hence, it's the forgotten. It's the opposite of memory. By the time we sense something, it's already in there. It's already there as, therefore, imperceptible. And so that's the subjective aspect to the paradox. There's also the objective aspect. And here paradox displays the element which cannot be totalized within a common element, along with the difference which cannot be equalized or cancelled. So it presents the element, the object, the thing, which can't be totalized, which is always outside our grasp of the thing. It's the thing within the thing, if you like. But it's kind of a risky way to think about it, because it's not a hidden, magical kind of essence of reality or anything. It's just something which is, it's already, as soon as we understand, as soon as we form an opinion, or as soon as we form an intuition of the object, it's already within the object itself. It's already a part of it. And along with the difference which cannot be equalized or cancelled, that difference can't be cancelled because it's a fundamental part of what the thing is. All phenomena are phenomena only to the extent that they embody, they're grounded in this more fundamental inequality, this more fundamental inequality, I should say, the unequal, Deleuze called it right earlier. And this, of course, is good for Deleuze, because for him, philosophy is revealed not by good sense, but by paradox. Paradox, he says, is the pathos or the passion of philosophy. And this paradox, or this inexplicability of difference, is where we are going to start in the next video, which means we are done for today, which means it's time for a summary. So first up today was difference and diversity. Diversity is the given. It's that empirical difference, that sensible difference, that difference as we understand it in the everyday. Difference, on the other hand, is that by which the given is given as diverse. It's the difference that makes the diverse diverse. We also looked at intensity here, where this was an important idea. All difference is a difference of intensity. And this led to what Deleuze's notion of disparity, which is the state of infinitely doubled difference. So each term in a relation of intensity refers to a prior difference, a prior intensity, a prior difference made up of two terms. And each term in that difference, in that intensity, refers to another pairing. So that infinitely doubled difference. The second part of the video was intensity and extensity. And we looked at this in terms of Carnot's and Curie's principles, which both express the idea that all phenomena are correlated with orders of difference, although they express that idea in different ways. First, we looked at the way that energy is always a combination of the intensive and the extensive. And here the former is always subordinated to the latter, which is a problem for trying to understand how change takes place, how phenomena, or it's a problem in trying to understand the foundations of phenomena, the foundations of things, how things arise. And we also noted that change negates difference. And again, here the idea is that intensity is covered over. So that the deeper truth, the underlying principle is being obscured when we think about it. The consequence here is that intensity or difference always appears as a quality or extensive. And so this basically just distorts intensity or difference so that we only see diversity. The third part of the video was good sense and common sense, which we were brought to because good sense and common sense are the ways that change negates difference. Common sense synthesizes diversity into unities. So it's static and qualitative. Static in the sense that it's, the word I used, it's a form which is applied, the form, if you like, of identity or unity. And it's qualitative because it's sensible. It's at this level of diversity, empirical difference. And then good sense synthesizes difference by reducing it. So this was dynamic and quantitative. Dynamic in the sense that it applies that, what I've called the form of common sense, and it's quantitative because it's insensible. And finally, we looked at paradox. Basically, the paradox was, how can difference be thought? If difference is that which creates the diversity, which is what we think, how can we then think difference in itself? And that's us for today. So thanks for watching. Hopefully that helped. And I'll see you in the next video.